Hello everybody, my name is Benjamin Wheeler, and today I have a new segment that I'd like to call Highlander Hindsight, where Merit Lodge isn't the only 2020 that will ultimately affect your deck design. Basically what I'm going to be doing is going through the past air quotes magic year and looking back on the sets, blocks, individual cards that I have misjudged. It's essentially my big sorry for the past year. This will involve looking at cards that I have overvalued and cards that I have undervalued. Some of them will be incredibly embarrassing, as I'm willing to say a couple inclusions on this list come from my inability to read the entire card. Remember kids, always read the fucking card. But anyways, to get into the swing of things, I'm going to be taking a look at Khans of Tarkir, Fate Reforged, Dragons of Tarkir, the Commander 2014 set, and Magic Origins. So I will be starting off by going through the cards that I gave a little too much credit to. And to start things off, who better than Clever Impersonator? Because this card was clearly just impersonating a good card. 2 and 2 blue. It's a clone, and when it comes into play, it's a copy of any non-land permanent on the battlefield. So great, it's a clone, costs 4 mana, which kinda sucks, because we're usually used to paying 2 mana for that for Phantasmal Image, or 3 mana for that in Phyrexian Metamorph, and getting a little bit of flexibility. But with this card, it costs 4, but it has much more flexibility than Metamorph could ever ask for, because this can be a Planeswalker, this can be an enchantment, can be pretty much everything that isn't a land. That said, it's also a 4-drop, and blue decks, there are a lot of good 4-drops to choose from, such as Jace the Mind Sculptor. Maybe you've heard of him, but I digress. This card is a little too expensive for the effect that you're looking to get, and I get it, it's kind of cute, you know, you get something that they have, you always want what you don't have, but you're better off using your mana and card slot on something else, something playable. We have Empty the Pits, double X, quad black, instant with Delve, put X 2/2 black zombie creature tokens onto the battlefield tapped. Now, this isn't the Black Entreat the Angels, but there's going to be a recurring theme in this particular episode. There's going to be a lot of Delve cards, or at least a decent amount of Delve cards, because Delve is a very difficult mechanic to look at. As we all know, it can be incredibly powerful, to the point where it's maybe a little too powerful. I'm talking to you, Treasure Cruise. But at the same time, it can get stuck in this awkward zone of it's just playable enough, but maybe you're better spent, you know, casting other cards, focusing on other things. When I looked at Empty the Pits initially, I thought this card was bonkers. It's an instant that makes tokens, and it can make a lot of tokens if you have enough cards in your graveyard. Of course, the problem is quad black, the double X is a little difficult, and why do this when you can just cast Dig Through Time and win off what you get from that? Unfortunately, this card is just being overshadowed by other win conditions in these colors and other Delve spells that, while they're not necessarily in these colors, although of course Tasker and Gurmag Angler are probably a safer bet, it never really filled that slot, however promising it may have looked. Heir of the Wilds, 2 mana 2/2 with Death Touch. It's a human warrior, and it has Ferocious. Whenever the heir attacks, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, it gets +1/+1 till end of turn. In the beginning, I had claimed that this card would be a pretty good card to throw into something like red-green aggro, a green-white aggro list, or even mono-green. But here's the thing. All those decks, they get new cards every single set. It's what I like to call white weenie syndrome, where No matter how the landscape of Magic changes, how they decide to focus on certain archetypes, take the game away from game-winning instants and sorceries, and put it on game-winning creatures and planeswalkers, there will almost always be at least one or two cards that you can consider for White Weenie in each new set, because Wizards recognizes that people like playing cheap white creatures. To that same effect, they also recognize that they like having aggressive green-based archetypes in the format. And when Heir came out, it was kind of on the end of, oh, this card could see play because, I mean, mono green is looking for things. Usually you're going to be able to turn on Ferocious in some of those decks, which turned out to be untrue. And Death Touch is relevant, which it's still a relevant ability, but as time has gone on and as more sets have been released, just better cards have come out, really. And even at the time, as I said, it wasn't all that impressive, but it didn't age well. And there hasn't even been that much time for it to age, so that leaves it in a pretty sad position. Mindswipe. There's not much to say about this. I don't know why the fuck this was included on the original list. I'm not sure if it was my medication, if it was the alcohol, if it was a combination of both things, which you should never do, people. And you know what? You should never play this card either. It's an X counterspell in blue and red, and they have to pay X, and it deals X damage to the spell's controller. So it's cool, right? You get to counter their shit, and you get to Banefire them out. No, that never really gets to happen. I much rather just see someone play Condescend and possibly Banefire separately, because together it seems like it's kind of interesting, but really it's just a giant pile of Rakshasa Deathdealer. Black and a green for a 2/2, Cat Demon. Pay 2, it gets +2/+2, pay 2, regenerate it. So it's in colors that are kind of hard to work around, unless you are running a Jund deck or a Junk deck, really. You're not going to want this in the bug lists. There are better creatures for you. You're not going to want this in the Jund lists, because there are more aggressive creatures for you. And you don't want this in Junk, because Junk you really just want to kind of hand attack them, disrupt them, and then play a big dumb idiot baby. And this card doesn't disrupt them, it doesn't attack their hand or anything. And while it is an idiot baby, it's not nearly big enough. And as far as playing it in a straight up black-green deck goes, that might still be a bit appealing, but those decks don't necessarily have a positive track record. And if one were to appear in the meta, it seems that the best route for that kind of deck would be one to abuse graveyard interactions and sacrifice interactions. Basically, this cat just is not in the right colors. Sultai Scavenger. This card's very simple, obviously. It's just a 6 mana with Delve, flying 3/3. When I first saw this card, I thought, oh, sick, it's a 1 mana 3/3 flyer. It's like a Delver's Secrets that you can play in this format. But here's the thing. It dies to Bolt, which is a little unfortunate. And this kind of has that similar... It's stuck in a similar situation as Empty the Pits was. Obviously not to that extreme, because this card is more straightforward. But it's very difficult to play him out in these aggressive decks, because you're just better off playing something quicker, faster, whatnot. And it requires you to have a lot of things in the yard to get any kind of advantage out of it. But the biggest problems being that it dies to very common removal spells. And it's not Tasigur, and it's not Gurmag Angler. It never really got time to spread its wings, if you will. Crux of Fate. 3 in double black. Choose one. Destroy all dragons or destroy all non-dragons. So really this is just the 5 mana black Wrath. And I'm on the fence about including this in this section, because it's a black Wrath of God. It may cost 5 mana, but I actually don't think that's as big as a deal as many people make it out to be. Especially if you're in black or playing a blue-black list, then you typically have the cards to deal with early on threats, where you don't actually have to rush to your damnation or your languish. So being 5 mana isn't that bad as far as I see it. But again, why play a blue-black list when you could just play Grixis or you could just play Esper? It's really, you don't have to make that big of a sacrifice to switch to those decks, and ultimately they just have more cards, more tools at their disposal. That's where Crux really falls flat, I think, is that the archetype that needs it or wants it is just not one that really stands out. Straight up blue-black doesn't really offer anything that the other control variants have to offer. And that's really just the fate of this card. Silumgar, the Drifting Death. So when I first saw this card, here's where we start clocking in on the I'm a huge idiot. I thought this card cost 5 mana. I thought this card was, cost similar to Dragonlord Ojutai. And I thought that was great. I still thought it was very niche, but hey, 5 mana for a 3/7 flying hexproof, that's pretty darn hard to kill. And the added ability of whenever he attacks, you can kill off all the mana dorks or the Savannah Lions and whatnot. That's kind of neat too. But the effect is underwhelming. The card costs more than I thought it did. And again, the decks that, if you're playing this in straight blue-black, then why aren't you playing Esper, or why aren't you playing blue-white-red? Or bug control, even. And this guy just doesn't really make the cut. There are better cards at 6 mana. There are certainly better finishers, and there are better ways of dealing with a swarm of elves. Teferi, Temporal Archmage. 6 mana, 5 loyalty. Its +1 is a sleight of hand. It's -1, you untap up to 4 permanents, and its emblem you will never get to. I included this card mostly because it has a line of text that says untap a Time Vault, or untap some islands off of a High Tide. And it technically does generate mana off of High Tide. If you have High Tide going, you tap 3 lands, add 6, this guy untaps 4, there you go, bada bing, bada boom. The problem is, that's not good enough. It's so far from being good enough. This guy, maybe if you still really just want every untapper that also can have kind of an upside to it, then maybe you want to throw him in. But at 6 mana and at doing nothing, I would avoid him. Harbinger of the Tides. This is a guy that, honestly, we haven't had enough time to really flesh out the Magic Origins cards, but I feel like we gave this guy too much credit. I'm not completely discrediting this card, as it's still a powerful effect, and it's a merfolk, so merfolk.deck will certainly be happy to welcome this into its ranks. But it's not the cute little tempo card that I think Adam and I made it out to be. Cards like this come and go, they get printed, there's some initial hype surrounding them, people want to play them, you think, oh, it's good in blue X tempo and whatnot, but really there are just better options. And that's a common theme with all these cards on the list. Now onto the cards that didn't really get a good reception initially, some were just flat out ignored, but really they have some great applications, or they're actually a lot better than originally thought. So to start things off, we have Become Immense. This is a delve spell, 5 and a green. Target creature gets +6/+6 until end of turn. Kind of passed over on this card because, it's a pump spell and it costs 6. But getting this off is huge. It's a Might of Oaks for 1 mana. And the decks that want to play pump spells, and a lot of them, they fill up their graveyard quite quickly, because the ones that come to mind are either Double Strike deck, 5-color Might of Alara deck, or Infect. And those cards play a lot of pump spells, they play a lot of snap lands, they fill up their bin quite quickly, and this card is just an absolute fucking house in those decks. This card has proven itself and its worth in other formats as well, such as Modern or Legacy Infect, where giving +6/+6 is, it's no joke. Butcher of the Horde. Now this guy, I do believe we gave him some praise, citing his casting cost being the only real difficulty surrounding him, but as it's been proven that there is a decent shelf for this card. And again, more cards have come out that have supplemented this kind of strategy, and I think the Butcher has a place. Obviously, his stats are quite nice. The sacrifice outlet to, beef him up, help swing life totals, it's quite nice. And if you can get around the casting cost, you're going to want to play this guy in the appropriate lists. So while we did give this guy a shout out, I don't think it was as loud as it should have been. Jeskai Ascendancy. This is a card that a lot of people looked at and thought, hey, this is probably broken, right? But it didn't really connect to how broken it actually could be as far as other formats go. And while the strength of this card also comes off the back of cards like Treasure Cruise or Dig Through Time, it has its place in Highlander, and it was ignored in the cons block review. You can play this in red, white, blue tokens. You can build a combo list around this card, which we'll touch on in Highlander Brouhaha, or if you're feeling extra spicy, you could play this in a tempo list, which I imagine will have enough token generators by the likes of Young Pyromancer or Monastery Mentor. Nothing really else to say about this card, as it's proven its worth and its strength. So go ahead and brew with this bad boy. Murderous Cut. In the initial review, we dismissed this card, or rather I dismissed this card, because there's already so much damn removal out there. Why would you want to play this? Again, Delve is very difficult to completely gauge. We recognize that, hey, maybe this card has some applications, maybe there are decks that want to just play this kind of removal spell, and I think the spectrum of decks that want to play this is much broader than originally thought to be. So what I'm trying to say is go and play this card and go and kill some creatures. Quiet Contemplation. This is a card that got completely ignored for good reason. It looks like crap. And maybe some of you have played this card in the limited format, the triple cons format. And it wasn't even that great then. I mean, it was spicy for sure, but I wouldn't go as far as to say it was, the best deck of it by any means. But I certainly think it has a place in Enchantress lists, as well as other kind of enchantment-based or stacks-based lockdown decks. Its ability to keep creatures down and out without... Its ability to keep creatures down and out, as well as restricting some creatures on using certain abilities, it's a pretty good effect to have. It's just very easily this card gets glossed over as it did originally, and I think it deserves at least some attention. Goblin Heelcutter. So it's a 4-mana 3/2 that when he attacks, a creature can't block. Obviously, this card was ignored because it costs 4 mana, and you only get a 3/2. And its ability, while decent, the Frenzied Goblin ability, it's not that exciting. But it has dash. And I think you're mostly just going to be dashing this card out. I think you're almost always just going to be dashing this card out and can't actually see any other reason except for maybe certain corner cases where you need a dude. Are you going to be playing this guy? So this guy, to me, just goes into Goblin lists if you're on the all-in aggressive build. And he's not super exciting, but hey, he can get the job done. Outpost Siege. So this card was another one that kind of got glossed over, where I think that was awfully unfair, because the cons ability on this card is quite nice. You get a free card every turn, or you get an extra card every turn. And the clause of you only get to play that card during that turn is one that will pop up a couple other times in this video, and I don't think I gave enough credit to that. Because in the decks where you are going to play Outpost Siege, which are mostly big red decks or stacks variants, or the blue-white-red kind of Enchantress list that I was mentioning before, getting to play that card on that turn, you're probably going to do that. those decks usually look to just tap out every single turn, and this can help you do that. The dragon side, forget about it, you're not going to be doing that. But the con side, it's worth paying 4 mana for. Renowned Weaponsmith. I said that these kind of cards probably don't have a spot. In the past they might have, or people might be looking to play these cards, but I'm changing my tune. After playing more and more with these cards, this guy alongside Vedalken Engineer, I realized that there is certainly a home for them. And it's in, obviously, artifact decks, but it's in the tap-out artifact decks. So I wouldn't play these kind of cards in the mono blue or blue X artifact decks that are looking to also kind of control the game through counter spells and whatnot. If you're in the tap out play dudes deck, then I would certainly want to play this guy. He has been great in battle bots, and I would certainly play him alongside his old pal Vedalken Engineer in something like an all-in Time Vault deck. Ugin's Construct. So another card completely missed, and it's understandable. It's a 4-mana 4/5 that when it ETBs you sack a permanent that's 1 or more colors. That's not very good. But in battle bots, ladies and gentlemen, that's fine. That's a deck that's looking to get 4 power on the board as quickly as possible, and this card fits the bill. Dragonlord Atarka. This is a card that I still am not sure I want to include it because I'm having difficulty seeing what kind of list wants to play it. The fact that it can't go to the dome is a little frustrating, but an 8/8 flying trample that can raft their board, or at least deal with the more difficult creatures on their board, that's not that bad. Trying to find a list again is the hard part. I imagine there's some kind of green-red ramp list that you would want to slide this bad boy in. But this is one that I'm willing to be wrong 2 times. Ire Shaman. So 2 mana 2/1, can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. It has Megamorph. When it's turn faced up, you exile the top card of your library, and until end of turn you get to play that card. So number 2 on the list of, hey, you get a free card this turn. I feel like there is a red deck that wants to play this card and the one that I'm sure I've done enough hinting for you guys to get to. There's a red deck that wants to play out these cards. Kind of goes for not necessarily the long game, but wants to at least have something to bring it back into the game. Aside from, the red lists that just have their Rakdos Cacklers and whatnot just killed before they can really do anything. If you are keen on playing red, and you are stuck in a meta with a lot of Obstinate Baloths and Languishes and the black-green deck mostly, or green-white deck, Kitchen Finks, whatever bullshit it is, I would recommend giving these guys a spin. I've kind of changed my tune after seeing them. Lightning Berserker, another card I'm not entirely sure about playing, but after dying several times to this card, and then killing a couple of people with this card, I think he's at least worth considering. Dash is a super interesting mechanic for the red deck to take advantage of, and this guy, hey, if you got a lot of mana, he's just a fireball. Sometimes you can play him out early, trade with a bigger thing, but that's not exciting. You're really just looking to get this guy as a mana sink late game when you're really hoping to draw spells, but hey, if you don't, at least you get to crack for 4 or so. Ojutai's Command. This is another one that's grown on me. The modes are a little more specific, but countering a creature and drawing a card, getting that kind of pseudo-cryptic command, that's always nice. Gaining 4 life and returning back a Wall of Omens or any other kind of 2-drop or less that they've killed, that's kind of nice. And any other kind of combination of it all rounds out to be a card at least worth considering. And that's one of the issues, is that when touching on this card originally, I kind of just dismissed it as a shitty cryptic command, or just a card that people that want to play Absorb will get into. But I think there's more applications, and certainly more options. Twin Bolt. 1 in a red. It's a Fork Bolt that's an instant. I didn't include this card because it's just a Fork Bolt that's an instant that costs 1 more. But I've been convinced by the Europeans that maybe it's alright to run this in red lists. If you're looking to run every single Arc Lightning possible, this is just another one. Sure, it's not as good as Arc Trail, and it's not as good as Forkbolt as far as mana efficiency goes, but the instant speed can end up actually being a neat little combat trick, which is something that was originally ignored. On the other hand, the woman in this card has a gigantic forehead, and that might just cause some players to turn away from it, but, you know, don't be that scared. Abbot of Carol Keep. This is a guy that obviously is the finale as far as the the free red cards comes. When it ETBs, you exile the top card, you can play that until end of turn. It has Prowess, which is a super big benefit. And originally I said I don't know if you want to play this because the 2-drop slot in red is very competitive. Now I'm changing my tune for the cards like this in Ire Shaman in that slot, or even the 3-drop slot, it's fiercely competitive, but it's also quite flexible. It's in that category of every set you're going to get something for that deck, which means that that deck will ultimately have more options. I'm sure that there is an ideal build for doing as much damage as quickly as possible, but red has shifted slowly in that you're not necessarily looking to kill them on turn 4 every single game. You can do that in even a deck like this, but you want to understand that if they duress you, or if they counter one of your spells or kill off one of your creatures, that can really set you back. And cards like this can help you pull back into that game. Hangerback Walker. This is the most embarrassing card on the list for me to touch on, even more than Silumgar or Slumgar or whatever the hell that dragon's named, because I didn't realize that you could pay 1 tap and put a counter on it. That ability makes this card quite good. And obviously people have seen this card in action in Standard, and there has been some kind of buzz of it being played in Highlander, and it's getting the praise that it deserves. The fact that you can Trinket Mage for this is cute. The XX, while a little iffy, originally I was more off put by that because I figured, well, you're paying 2 mana for this 1/1 that it dies and you get a 1/1. It's just a mere sire that you get a flyer instead. But you can make it bigger. It's got that Chronometon thing going, and that makes this card actually quite good. Funny enough, I think that this card has applications in decks like White Weenie as well, where you can find it with a Ranger of Eos and slap it down for some ludicrous amount of mana, where in the past really your go find 'em creature was Machias. But Machias doesn't really give you as much of a safety net against Rathicods. So, my apologies, Hangerback Walker, you're alright in my book. Jace, Vryn's Prodigy, and the flip side, Jace Telepath Unbound. This is another card that after playing with it, I think it's actually quite good. It's still incredibly vulnerable. It still has limited applications, in my opinion, but I would definitely play this card in a Reanimator deck that's looking to play all the looters and all the Merfolk Trader type of cards. The upside is that obviously you get a Planeswalker, and then you can recast your hand attack spell or your little cantrip that you may have played earlier, or even a tutor that you've used to rebuy an effect. So my apologies, Jake. Liliana, Heretical Healer, another card that I feel is a bit better than we initially let on. 3 mana for a 2/3 lifelink, and the ability to get an additional token as well as her flipping over to a Planeswalker, that's also quite relevant. Super synergistic with the Aristocrats deck, the black-green kind of sacrifice your own thing deck, as well as just throwing it into mono-black midrange, or even like at a black aggressive deck that's looking to have more endgame applications. Still not completely sold on her, as she's very vulnerable, similar to Jace, but I wouldn't count her out. Speaking of cards I've count out, Nissa, Vastwood Seer, and Nissa, Sage Animist. Still not entirely sold on this card. This is another card similar to Dragonlord Atarka that I'm not sure that I should even include on this, but being able to find... You wouldn't want to play Borderland Ranger. That's just... I'm going to flat out say that. I think if you're dedicating space to Borderland Ranger or Civic Wayfinder, they're just better cards to play. Play Yavimaya Dryad or Wood Elves or Yavimaya Elder even. or play that guy before the other two. Maybe not Wood Elves, but I digress. The ability to turn into a somewhat relevant Planeswalker is nice, and the upside, it comes along free of charge, essentially, in certain decks. I wouldn't play this in Cradlehoof still. You might want to play it in the black-green rock deck, or I could see this being played in Turboland, but other than that, again, narrow application, but I think it deserves a bit more credit than we originally gave it. Thopter Engineer. 2 and a red for a 1/3, you get a 1/1 flying Thopter. Artifact creatures you control have haste. This is one of the cards that suffered from our brief scan of the set when we were reviewing it. This card isn't that strong by itself, obviously, but if you are playing it in an Affinity deck or a BattleBots list that has red mana for the Galvanic Blasts, the Shrapnel Blasts, you're probably going to want to play this card, because giving a Lodestone Golem haste is quite scary, giving a Wormcoil Engine haste, quite scary. It's also in the nice mana cost of Ancient Tomb plus Moxen, or, you know, land into Ancient Tomb this guy, setting you up for a nice little turn of turn 3 Juggernaut, or whatever the hell you want to play. Downside, it does not combo with Ugin's Construct. Whirler Rogue. 2 and 2 blue. 2/2, ETBs, get 2 Thopters, tap 2 untapped artifacts, target creature can't be blocked this turn. This is another card where I looked at it and saw, oh, it's a 4 mana, you get a 2/2 and you get 2 things, that's kind of cool, but I mean, what kind of deck wants to have this? But after testing it out in BattleBots, I think it's quite good in that list. There are certainly a lot of artifacts that you can tap down to make your Juggernaut, your Lodestone Golem, your other Juggernauts, to make them unblockable, to make your not Steel Golem, because, I mean, playing this guy after Steel Golem seems a little odd. Seems a little cheaty, if you know what I mean. But you have a lot of artifacts that you don't care if they're tapped. And I'm not just talking about the Thopters on the turn that you play this card. I'm talking about Crucible Worlds, talking about, and you wouldn't play Ensnaring Bridge, but, you know, your Sphere effects, that kind of stuff, equipment. Its secondary ability is quite relevant and pretty easy to turn on. And the fact that you get 4 bodies for the price of 1, it's worth including on this list. And that ends the edition of Highlander Hindsight. I hope you guys like this. These kind of videos won't be coming out that often, obviously, because we have to wait for a whole nother year of Magic to happen. But, I mean, time flies when you're playing blue. Thank you for watching, and if you like that, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more hidden gems, set reviews, deck techs, and much more. Also be sure to follow our Canadian Highlander Facebook page, and check out our newly updated website at canadianhighlander.wordpress.com. Links for our various podcasts will also be included in the description below. Thanks again, and feel free to leave any questions, comments, or concerns, and one of the council members will be sure to answer as best as they can. And remember, folks, there can be only one.